But this was fun. This has been very nice, I've got to say. It's been like coming home.
Yeah, it's like slipping on a pair of particularly savage slippers.
Really was, really was. I was rewatching the 2 episodes this afternoon because I'd done exactly what you did, Elliot.
I'm glad I'm not the
honestly,
Wally, because
every time
I forgot that we had that basically I'd watched the episodes in preparation, and then Spooktober was suddenly upon us. I have to confess, I haven't gone back to rewatch them. I've just went, I think I remember them. So this could be very interesting. There could be a lot of silence from me tonight.
Well, I did. I mean, I rewatched them this afternoon, and it was just, again, it was just wonderful coming back. It's nice being in Hannibal's office again.
Yeah.
Although, what a bastard Jack is in these episodes. I mean, we've had. We've had intimations of his bastardry throughout, but he really tips it over the edge in these episodes, doesn't he?
What I like about Lawrence Fishburne's performance as well is that an actor could make the choice with their director to curb that somewhat, and maybe up the ambiguity. And I think there's a tendency with actors as well is that we quite like ambiguity. Let's play up there, and he doesn't. He plays those lines. And he plays them for all their hypocrisy or all their manipulation and gaslighting. And I actually think it works far better that he does.
It really does.
Because it absolutely taps into the wider themes of. I mean, everyone is. I'm very conscious that we haven't heard Jack.
Yeah. Are you there, Jack?
I'm here. I'm
right. Sorry.
Happy to listen.
We're just having, just wondering in case there are any more technical gremlins happening.
Crumbs. I hope we're
no. I believe we've banished all the gremlins.
Oh, that's
good.
But it's. I mean, the whole series, it's one of the things, although I did plow ahead into the episode after our second episode tonight, remembering these bits and just having those threads, as with Jack Crawford and so on. The whole series is really solidifying now around this idea that it's about versions of ourselves, if you like, how we present them to the world, juxtaposed with how core personalities can be obliterated. Will's core personality is under attack not only from Hannibal but from Jack, we just mentioned. I just watched the episode with Abel Gideon manipulated by Chilton and then by Hannibal, Abigail Hobbs, and so on and so on and so on. That seems to be the almost the show in abstract, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? It is like the thesis of the show. It's like it's attacking the very notion of identity, that the concept that there isn't the only character that has absolute identity in this show. And it's not actually, no, it's not even true of Hannibal. It's not even true of Hannibal, because his sense of identity is shaken by Will, of course. By a couple of other characters too. I mean, Abigail, I think it's shaken as well. I don't think he ever intended to become this paternal figure ever. No. It's just because there's something.
His project has so many dimensions to it that I think even he is caught in those dimensions at times. He's not quite the puppet master and the master tactician at all times. And I think if he was, the show would be rather dull.
It would, wouldn't it? It wouldn't really work. He'd be too sort of Mephistophelian, And he is that. He is
those things. But when he gets caught off guard, it's actually very welcome, because actually the show feels very dangerous when Hannibal is caught off guard.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? I mean, because of course, we've spoken about Hannibal being basically on our side, and us being on Hannibal's side. The audience being just so taken in by this guy, as Will and everyone else is so charmed by him, that it feels very, very dangerous for the show in its entirety when suddenly he's in danger of being exposed. And you get elements of that in these episodes, of course. I mean, in True Normand, you get that it's happened so incredibly rarely where, and again, Mads does this thing where it's barely anything. It's not, you can't even call it an expression, but there's a moment where he's in Jack Crawford's office and Jack tells them that Nicholas Boyle's body has been uncovered. Yes, and you can see there's something about the way Mads plays it. You can see that Hannibal is, this could be bad for me. That's interesting.
Because when you start cataloguing it, he's only actually, by this point, done a very few things. They've been very effective, but we're now building. The biggest thing he's done is with regards to Abigail, and having to drop those revelations. And now I think Jack is on edge. Jack knows something, but he hasn't quite worked out why. So it's building now. Actually, if you just follow Hannibal's story, taking away the flashbacks and the examples of him working in a much more complex way, he's only actually done a few quite basic things to get the chess pieces into the position they are at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, again, I mean, we spoke about this in previous episodes. It's not necessarily this like vast Machiavellian thing. He seems to be just
quite responsive, actually, and
responsive. Yeah, quite reactionary. Yeah, and when he gets these moments of surprise where he is suddenly potentially under threat, I think he enjoys it. I think that's part of why he's doing it, because characters like Will always surprise him. Abigail surprises him this time round, and I think he rather likes that. It's something novel, isn't it? It's something new. It's making the game a bit more fun.
And also that revelation about Abigail Hobbs, it subverts so much standard plotting around any drama that presents a young victim, especially with a sort of young woman victim. I mean, she remains a victim, don't get me wrong.
Yep.
She even with the revelation,
complex,
but yes, it's not as we imagine it.
She's not innocent. I mean, that would be the tendency, wouldn't it? In this I say type of show, but in these episodes, particularly in True Normand, it's kind of shedding type.
You have this little wiggle room where she has brought her father near enough mirror images. What, to stave off her own death, to save herself?
Yes.
There's wiggle room here. It's not.
There is
not absolutely.
It's not one way or the other,
down.
is it? I mean. No. Hannibal definitely sees something in her, and obviously what he sees is the potential for a child that is kind of akin to him and to what he sees in Will, a child who is without boundaries, without kind of moral boundaries. But I love the ambiguity of that dinner scene. I love that where they're cleaning up after dinner, and she gives her confession, and you just don't know, because she is now, of course, an unreliable narrator.
Yes.
She's very unreliable on a number of levels. You don't know to what degree she's maybe been repressing this, to what degree she's been in denial about it. I mean, Hannibal obviously has known pretty much all along, because he's Hannibal and he's the devil, and he just knows. But also, I mean, it's so odd, isn't it? You get these lies and deceptions from Hannibal, but you also get this wonderful sincerity that comes from him. And when he is talking about Abigail in protective terms, I think he's absolutely sincere. In the same way, in the next episode, when he's talking about Will as his friend, even though he's doing appalling things to him, I think he's absolutely sincere. I think he's absolutely doing what he thinks is in Will's best interest. He's guiding him towards that eventual transformation into a more fluid state of self, something that, again, we're going to see much later on, because Will does get there. Will does get to a point where he loses this more moral sense of self and becomes something other. He's just on the edge of flowering.
And it is curious, as I say, that there are so many pushes and pulls in Hannibal's MO about all this, because on one hand, I think this drive for family is very interesting. I think, again, we're back to something we mentioned in previous episodes, that and of course it's a very clear connection, really. We're back in Dracula territory. The powerful but lonely man who wants Will as a partner, wants a father for Abigail, rather as the Count surrounding himself with brides, or befriending Jonathan Harker, and all these, and yet he's also pushing in a very interesting direction with regards to Will's state of health, which is being obscured, and then of course his collaboration with
Sutcliffe,
with
yeah.
Sutcliffe, who is also a fan. I feel we don't have enough time with Sutcliffe. I think he's a very potentially interesting character in and of himself.
Potentially, yes. There's a couple of characters actually in these episodes, which, from what I understand, they were meant to have bigger roles. So Lance Henriksen's character was meant to recur. He wasn't just meant to be a one-off. He was meant to be a recurring character that would, bizarrely, I mean, really strangely, he would form another paternal figure towards Will. I don't know how that would have come out, but that's what was apparently meant to happen. Of course, it didn't for reasons that I'm not sure about. So he is this almost throwaway character, and his purpose in the episode is really interesting because he doesn't. It's the least interesting of the serial killer of the week characters and plot. The plot happens almost entirely off screen.
Yeah, you do get the impression that they're now really trying to shed this initial format,
and it's like really forceful and almost contemptuous in this episode. It's like, no, it's all happening over here. You're not really going to see a great deal of this particular serial killer and his work. And even when you do, it's going to relate to what's happening to Will and his dynamic with Abigail and Jack and Hannibal. That's the only point at which it's interesting. And on a sort of meta level, it's this whole thing of the show being it's a giant diseased brain. It's like multiple facets of one giant personality talking to itself and reflecting itself. Reflections and echoes.
Oh well, the mirroring reflections. It really is. But to be honest, I actually rather got something out of the banality after all these sort of aspiring godlike killers attempting to steal fire. I liked that he fucked up. I liked that he was small. He made an extraordinary. I mean, it's interesting because it did sort of get. I went off on a sort of a flight of fancy as I watched it, because I thought, well, he's made this extraordinary art installation, of course, but the context for the piece is petty, and I think in its way, this episode is making almost a comment about contemporary art. You know how I mean, art itself becoming increasingly obviously a commercial enterprise throughout the latter half of the last century, and then artists becoming commodities or celebrities. Their personalities confer confidence on pieces. I mean, we're in the area of art as market now, and obviously several key artists of the period making grand gestures out of prosaic content. It's the attempt to make almost impressive decoration out of stunted concerns, either because they have become shop-worn or dislocated from the more, if you like, divine contexts of artists from much earlier period, Renaissance artists, obviously, especially in a religious context, or because, simply, life in late modernity is simmered down the sort of cosmic scale of inspiration. The artist retreats into their own. I mean, we're used to the idea of the artists we've sort of grown up knowing. Almost their MO is they retreat into their own neuroses or anxieties about death, lack of inspiration, or the rather paltry everything's for sale world around them. I mean, a lot of pop artists were satirizing themselves, or to have a comment on being, if you like, lost in the labyrinth where what something called art has merged with advertising or other pieces of, if you like, visual coding in what we have, which is obviously an intensely consumerist society. So I kept thinking, here we've got this totem pole, this totem that suggests something. I mean, it's a great image because it's quite near the beginning. It's this sort of opening image, isn't it?
It's just there.
It's just there,
isn't it? Stark wasteland. It's just there, and
you've got this
weird as well. Like the setting is weird because it's so.
Because it almost goes into Manhunter. It's that thing about the body against the raw background of the shoreline, which Manhunter was kind of tapping into. The totality of God's creation, all that, the precision of it, the time taken to make it. It seems like a really grand gesture, and it's nothing.
It's not
about almost nothing. And so then this, what you were saying about the mirroring, the reflection, tying into Will's quite actually physical reasons for his breakdown. They're not psychological. He has a physical health problem, just as Cotard syndrome in the next episode on its sufferer. So we even have melting clocks in this episode if we want to really push the art thing. Melting clocks, memory loss, hallucinations. So, but they're not as complex as Will suspects.
No.
And it's the same with the totem. The artist obscures them. So in the case Hannibal, as we said, with help from Sutcliffe, makes them feel stranger and bigger than they are. So I quite liked how this episode was playing with this idea that the first piece of information that we get is it feels cosmic or divine or big. We're back in that territory of godlike killers, as I said earlier, stealing fire and so on, and then it's revealed as nothing of the sort. And I thought Lance Henriksen, his monologue about being at the funeral and being the only one aware, all these really tiny petty things. I actually rather liked it, because in a way it was sort of putting a nail in the coffin of that particular strand of Hannibal, which was basically how do we make Hannibal understandable and accessible to a modern audience? Well, we'll do CSI Baltimore. And then kind of just really subverting it and saying, well, none of this means anything anymore. We're going off in a different direction, and we're going to end on our first serial killer of the week who's nothing. He's
nothing. He's more like an actual psychopath, an actual serial killer, who are generally petty, inadequate people.
I mean, we've all read about them, or it's always the thread that interviews with Nilsson, for example. The revelation is always, my God, these people are profoundly
boring,
petty, dull,
myopic,
wrapped up in themselves, myopic,
people,
and this one
powerfully inadequate when it comes to human interaction. That's the general thing. They are powerfully inadequate.
So this plot almost just becomes one. It's almost like the B plot it flags up the ironies in the A plot. Will's health, for all that's being done around it, is actually a very physical concern which can be treated. And the fallibilities of Hannibal, as you said earlier about suddenly everything is a bit smaller, which I think the show is often not wanted to do. It is wanted because that's part of its way of presenting itself as almost this metaphysical, and then suddenly everything's a bit smaller. But I think it played to a strength doing that at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I did find very interesting in this episode is how often Hannibal is wrong-footed. During that conversation with Abigail after the dinner scene, he says something that is actually wrong. It's actually incorrect. He says to Abigail, because of course at that point Abigail she's smart. She's intuited that Will knows about the whole Nicholas Boyle incident. She's just intuited it, and she's quite scared. And Hannibal says, he'll keep the secret. He'll keep the secret because he doesn't want the only good thing in his life tainted, and that's you. He's wrong. He's actually wrong about that. You know what he doesn't want tainted? Will doesn't want his relationship with Hannibal tainted.
No.
That's part of why he's keeping the secret. That's part of why he doesn't go to Jack with it. Because it's not...
Which is also why Alana won't believe that Abigail did anything. Alana won't believe that Abigail's guilty, because if she is, then that means Hannibal's lying.
And it also is one of the reasons that, and it foreshadows the moment where she absolutely refutes the idea that Hannibal could have anything to do with it.
Right. Hannibal is almost like he's absolute at this point in their minds, isn't he? He is pillar of stability and morality, which of course makes the inevitable revelations of all the betrayals that much more toothsome when they come about.
Yeah.
On the totem pole on the beach, because it is a beach, every time I see this, I always have this idea of like the guy's in the middle of erecting the totem pole, and another guy comes by with his dog on a leash, and the conversation.
This is one of the weird things. This is what I was watching the episode this afternoon, and I was thinking, you know what? This must have taken this. First of all, transporting all the bloody bodies, all the stuff that you need. This must have taken hours to do. Hours and hours and hours. Plus the fact that you've got a guy who's still alive that you have to go through the business of killing and filleting and rearranging to get on the top. This must have taken, in any like real or logical sense, it's impossible. It's absolutely
they're making almost
impossible.
a virtue out of these lapses in logic, because obviously in the next episode as well, there is no way that you have to forgive me, it's a while since I've watched it, but the name of the character who has Cotard syndrome.
Georgia Madchen.
How is she following Will halfway across the countryside?
Yes, yeah.
And,
but
it becomes part of.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a mistake, does it?
No,
it feels
because
like it's part of Will's.
It's rather like this totem pole. It feels like we're just being drawn into the same, upside down, inside out visions that Will has.
That Will is.
The world, that we don't get to see the world quite as it is either. Which is, I mean, they don't overdo it. It's just a suggestion.
No,
but the
idea
there,
but it's been there before, hasn't it? It's been there before.
We've time lapsing and everything. Objective reality. The viewer is not permitted objective reality or sort of documentary style or cinema verite style reality. We're not allowed to peek in on that. We just peek in on people, how it's filtered through other people.
That's why characters like Jack are doomed to fail. They are doomed to tragedy in this show, because they're trying to operate, or rather they're trying to impose a world which is absolute, which is not protean. I mean, he says it in this episode, doesn't he, when he's talking to Will? He says, I am bedrock. And you know that that's a delusion. That's a delusion of ego. That's absolutely not true. We know that's not true, because he is manipulating Will all the way through. He's lying to Will all the way through. In that scene where because of Lawrence Fishburne's performance, Jack is aware there's something wrong with Will. You can see it. But when he says to him, "Is there a problem?" He's not asking.
I know.
He's not asking. It's telling
it's such a horrid moment.
It is, isn't it? It's such a manipulative, vile, patriarchal, paternalistic moment where it's like, no, there is no problem, because we cannot have this. I cannot have this. I require you to be well.
To hide as well.
Yeah.
To hide.
Telling Will to be well, it's created sick and commanded to be well, isn't it? It's God, it's Jack as God, effectively. And again, I mean, Alana knows this. Of course, she comes to learn this later in later episodes. She really accuses Jack of this, and she's absolutely right. He can see all the way through that there are cracks and that there are fevers and there are things happening, but not just to Will either, but through other characters. As you said, I think he does. He doesn't suspect, but he's got his nature, his suspicious, paranoid nature means that he does question Hannibal on some level. He just doesn't want to. He doesn't want to, because he's as in love with Hannibal's aesthetics and charm as anyone else is, as everyone else is.
Well, Jack doesn't know what TV show he's in.
No.
And if Hannibal is guilty of anything, then that means that Jack isn't in the TV show that he thinks he's in. It means he's in a different TV show. And Jack doesn't want to have to face that. He doesn't want to have to face the possibility that he's not in CSI Baltimore.
And in a sense, that is what the show is doing to everyone other than Jack, i.e. the people at home. You are not in the show you think you're in. And now it's really it's killing the show you thought you were in, but you were never in it anyway. And part of, I mean, the clues are there, even insofar as we see crime scenes through Will's eyes. We see them through this capacity he has. There's an awful lot of subjectivity in this. Sometimes it's quite explicit, and sometimes it creeps up on us. But I think the whole thing is you're not watching what you think you're watching, and you're not watching it through the lens of something called quote unquote realism, which we've explored in many different things we've looked at beyond Hannibal in our Spooktober season. It's ideological. We've said this, and
absolutely, yeah.
How certain things like Hereditary and Fire Walk with Me and Hannibal get closer to the true dysfunctions of a lived experience for not doing those things. I just think that Hannibal, certainly by this point, is getting more pointed about it.
it's getting quite spiky, isn't it? The whole thing
Yeah.
is getting quite spiky. There's a scene towards the end when they encounter Lance Henriksen in his little house, and where Will get, again, this is something Jack brought up in earlier episodes, where Will can be unpleasantly moralistic at times, and hypocritically so. And he says, he makes a point. They don't need to do this. They don't need to tell him this. They just need to arrest him and to take him away. But Will makes a point of telling him, "Oh, you murdered your own son, by the way."
Yes,
You just because he regards this character, this guy, as grubby and unpleasant. You know what? Jack is doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Jack's doing and has done the same thing by his own admission to Miriam Last, right?
It runs throughout the cast. I mean, Freddie Lowndes is doing it. Abigail's doing it. And,
Abigail's dad. There's that again. There's this
Garrett's
mirroring with Garrett Jacob Hobbs, whereas Lance Henriksen's character kills his son out of ignorance and out of
ignorance. Yeah.
Complete ignorance. Abigail Hobbs, Garrett Jacob Hobbs, would have killed his daughter out of a very twisted, perverse sense of love, obsession.
Wow, that's the story that they went with. Anyway, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you were talking earlier about the flashback sequence that we get of Abigail and her father hunting, and you were talking about her being an unreliable narrator. Yes, but I think she's being an unreliable narrator when she's telling Hannibal, essentially, I had to help him kill those girls
I agree.
because otherwise it would have been me. I think that's the bullshit.
Yeah, me too.
Whereas the flashback sequence we get, I think, is more likely to be an objective view of what was actually happening, because that, it doesn't look like that to me. It doesn't look like Abigail is. It looks like she's being not exactly forced, but she's doing it. And I mean, she wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for her father's influence. Let's go that far. But at the same time, she doesn't seem terrified of him, and she's very good at it, isn't it? It shows her to be almost intuitively with him. In she knows which girl on the train he's going to want. They just they exchange a look, and they understand. She understands exactly what he wants. And she goes and does it, and she's frighteningly good at it. She makes friends with this girl instantly. She's camouflaged, and I don't buy. I just don't buy the narrative that she's constructed. Well, I mean, we know she's a liar because she's hiring Freddie Lowndes to tell one fake story for her.
Yes.
I think the story that she's telling Hannibal, and that Hannibal is pretending to believe, is just as fake. Personally.
That's it, because I don't think he'd be interested in her if that was the case. If she was motivated by fear, if she was just a victim, I don't think he'd be interested in her. She would, again, just kind of be meat, wouldn't she?
He says to her, "You're not a monster, you're a victim." No, he's interested in her because she is a monster, not a victim. And that's part of the dance. Her pretending to be tortured with remorse, and him pretending to tell her, "No, you're a victim." It's all part of the dance.
And there are two tells, I think. Number one is that when you're getting the information which is being spoken in dialogue about, I had to do this, else my father would turn on me, which is what she's essentially going down the route of. But when you see her cozying up to these mirrors of herself, that's not action that comes from fear. She's too good at it.
Yeah,
she's too good. But I think the other thing is it makes more sense in terms of Hannibal's project, because he needs the intense empathy that Will taps into. Now it's not what Will brings to bear in a situation and what he brings to bear in a situation is not going to be fueled by someone who was genuinely a victim through and through. There has to be some fuel there, and Hannibal is very clear that Abigail is a kind of fuel for that family setup he's got in mind. She has to be bringing other pieces of information. So this is where I agree with what you're saying, Jack. It wouldn't be interesting to Hannibal, either purely for himself or in respect to this project he has with Will in mind as well. If she was just this, poor young woman who was doing this to survive.
Right,
There's far more,
perversely,
and we've had so many clues as well.
Yeah, perversely,
she's a little
I don't
bit
think she'd
like.
be. Sorry, go on, Jack.
She's a little bit like God, I'm blanking on his name. The Ray Wise character in Twin Peaks.
Leland.
Part of how
Leland, yeah.
Leland, exactly, Leland Palmer. Part of how she is a victimizer is that she is playing at being the victim as she does it. There's a key sequence where Will only officially realizes one thing about Abigail in this, which is that she killed Nicholas Boyle.
Yes, yeah.
And then you get the conversation between him and Will and Hannibal, where Hannibal spins another fake version of that event to Will, where it's self-defense again. And again, there's something else in this episode where when Nicholas Boyle's body is found and they talk about the autopsy results, he's described as having been gutted like a fish.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't go with the depiction of it as a self-defense, almost accidental stabbing either.
Does it?
No. Almost instinctively, it's not a premeditated murder, but almost instinctively, she guts him. She fillets the guy.
Yeah.
It's just instinctive, but she's sort of staring and weeping and terrified and horrified as she's doing it, but she's still doing it. And Will, on some level, because of the empathy connection, he has worked this out, because you get the dream sequence where he is stabbed by her. He is in the Nicholas Boyle position, and it's part of what makes that repeated. The various versions of that scene that we get so disturbing, because Abigail, as she's doing it, she looks horrified by what she's doing, but she's still the one doing it. And Will, on some level, has clocked that.
Yeah, he has. He absolutely has, and he doesn't want to. This is the thing. It's that moralistic part of Will that it's that part of him that Jack Crawford wants to appeal to, that wants things to be normal and moral and absolute, but which isn't there. Perversely, part of his attraction to Abigail Hobbs, part of why he sees her as a daughter figure, is because she is one of these killer characters that he empathizes with, and that's part of it. He may not want to admit it.
That's what makes them a family. That's what makes Hannibal and Will and Abigail a family. They have the shared nature. They're all killers.
That's it. And Hannibal gets it. That's the thing. That's the difference, isn't it? Will denies it. He gets it on like a subconscious or instinctive level. But Hannibal gets it totally consciously. And he's trying to bring them both to a point where they can just admit it, to themselves and to one another. If he could sit them down at that dining table and say, right, okay, bullshit over, masks off, all of just talk to one another and tell one another what you are, and it'll be okay from this point on. He would do it, but he knows that that's not going to happen, particularly with Will. It's just not going to happen.
To get them out of our world.
That kind of is what he's doing. It's just a longer process than that.
It's a longer one. Yeah, it's a much longer process. Yeah,
he has to get them out of our world. That is to say, Jack Crawford's world, and into the Hannibal world, which is you're better, therefore you can do these things. You're above morality.
That's it.
These are just human beings. We are better, because he recognizes. Certainly with Will, he recognizes that there are faculties or abilities or perspectives that elevate them. I was very, and in fact, it's almost a throwaway thing, but one of the lovely little moments that sort of underscores that, I thought, was the revelation that Freddie Lowndes is a vegetarian, which I thought was wonderful.
That is a master stroke.
There she is. She's down in the. As far as he's concerned, she is down in the gutter. She's the gutter press. But they are through a dark mirror. They are reflections of one another. Again, it's that mirror thing. They're both very manipulative.
In her world, she's the world, she's the apex predator, but she's the apex predator that chooses not to actually consume the flesh.
Or rather, she is cannibalistic in a different way.
Yeah,
she's sort of like abstractly cannibalistic. She chews up human beings
But the wonderful
drains
thing
them dry of
is,
their
I
stories and
think,
spits them back
yes,
out.
that's it. She feeds in a different way. But one of the things I love about it, and again, it's just in the detail of the playing as well, is you were saying earlier, George, about Hannibal just being knocked occasionally. There's a sense in that moment where she takes a superiority over him, which is very difficult for him to handle.
Yeah, it's so good, isn't it? It's so good. And again, I think he likes
it's so
it. I think he's rather charmed.
It shouldn't come from
When he
her. It
hands her
makes
the
her
salad,
interesting.
have you noticed what he says to her? He doesn't call her Freddie. He says Miss Lowndes. He's very respectful to her.
Yeah.
Very respectful.
The way they've presented her in the show as well. I mean, they both in their separate ways get into the dirt. I mean, he does as well, because I mean he kills everything. But they're both aesthetically immaculate.
Yeah,
I mean, they both are so fantastically turned out. She's got the most amazing look to her.
Again, don't we? We get the plastic suit coming out again when he kills Sutcliffe in the next episode. So yes.
But what she wears, her hair, the way her makeup's done, everything about her is, it's only the revelation that she's this real gutter journalist, but it's almost put in the same space as the revelation that Hannibal is a killer. It's a. They have such an interesting dynamic. In fact, so much so that I think the series could have tapped it even more. They don't choose to go in that direction, and obviously in some ways they're bound by the novels, because there are certain beats in the novels that they want to hit as well. And of course, this is a big ensemble cast, and I think as much as I love the series, it can be a bit hit and miss around certain characters, because there's an awful lot of people to deal with. But there's another series out there where there is more Lowndes and Lecter.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like the fact that she is one of the very few characters who comes out of this entire thing almost totally unscathed. The most violence that's done to her is by will.
Yeah. And by suggestion, of course, because we have the wool pulled over our eyes later. Is it the third series?
It's the second series, I think.
The second series, yes.
Second series, yeah.
Which of course reverses what they did in Manhunter.
Of course, in the book. Of course. I mean, Freddie gets absolutely
and
toasted.
in the novel, of course, they lift straight from the novel in Manhunter, of course.
They do, and in this series as well, but just in a slightly different way.
They just play it in a different, which is it's a great move. I mean, this is something I was only thinking about in regards to something else. In that there is it's a shame really that so much kind of pop culture, particularly television and film, has got hooked on the idea of the prequel, because there is a much cleverer game to play, and that is the idea of revisiting texts quite head on, but opening them up, substituting certain scenes, taking them in a different angle. Hannibal does this. I mean,
it does it beautifully. And isn't it interesting? It doesn't seem to have suffered like the same degree of lashback that a lot of when certain properties do that. Oh my God, the lashback from the established fan base tends to be really profound.
I mean, I don't know what the response has been to the other thing I was thinking about, which is because it's not really it's odd. I've always dipped in and out of the Star Trek universe, and I mean, nostalgia with Next Gen, and particularly there's some versions of it I've never even seen. I mean, I've never seen Enterprise, I've never seen Discovery, but one of the things I found quite interesting about this Strange New World series, which is essentially a prequel, it is pre the Kirk era, is actually what they're doing is they are kind of revisiting texts or pulling them inside out, or doing what Hannibal does, a little more obviously. I mean, they are announcing it a little bit more, but there's real mileage in it, and it's something that I hope, instead of just going to the straight ahead prequel, kind of happens more and more. I think Hannibal does it brilliantly with its source material in terms of the novels, but also the previous films. I mean, we've talked about how Abel Gideon is a riff on Brian Cox's Hannibal from Manhunter, and they do things from the later films with Hopkins, of course. But yes, I was watching an episode of Strange New Worlds last night, and I thought, this is actually, I know enough about this series to know what particular episode or scenario they're actually heading for, and then doglegging into something else, rearranging aspects of that first episode. I mean, I imagine that an awful lot of fans would be horrified, because it's actually destroying canon.
Bizarrely,
continuity.
I don't understand this at all, but I do know that the Trek fandom is one of the most conservative out there.
Right.
And one of the most reactionary. I mean, given the nature of Star Trek, it's the political context of its original creation. I don't understand that, but that is the case. So I imagine
a real potential for so many long-running things, whether to take their old stories, their old texts, and just warp them, subvert them,
subvert them,
jam them into other texts and so on. And you do get a sense of that with Hannibal. And as I say, it's just
absolutely. And it's worked so beautifully. I mean, this is for as we've discussed many times, and if people haven't got it by now, just to reiterate, this is for me, it is the Hannibal story. This version is it. It's the quintessential Hannibal. It does such beautiful things with the characters, with the setting, with the concept, and it elevates it. I mean, it doesn't just elevate Thomas Harris's original novels. It blows them apart. It makes them effloresce into all of these dimensions and states that are in the books, but they're only there in sort of like nascently in pupa form.
That's something that I want to do with texts that I love, but which I know are, or which I feel are insufficient. And I think a lot of people probably feel something similar to this, which is where a particular text, you have enough affection for it, or you think there's enough in there that is interesting and good, that you don't just want to junk it, but as it stands, it's not good enough. It shows inescapable signs of having been made up as it goes along, like something like the X-Files, for instance. And the X-Files has that "we're making this up as we go along" thing just written all over it in huge letters.
It does.
And that creates a huge problem of finding narrative and thematic satisfaction in things. And you get this in a hell of a lot of the texts that people do have these deep attachments to and deep investments in, like Star Trek, like Star Wars, and like a lot of these sorts of things, which are, there is a core of something interesting or potentially really good in these stories, but as they were initially done, they are just unsatisfying. They are insufficient. And what you want, the feeling you have, certainly I feel this, is the desire to get inside them and muck around and put them right, to change things, to sort of start from the beginning again and do essentially the same thing, but to do it better. And that I think is what, and in a more sort of whole, in a more narratively and thematically whole and satisfying sort of way. And that I think is what they're doing with the Lecter corpus of stories in Hannibal. They're taking this set of texts that we as a culture do find very interesting, and they're saying, okay, we're going to start from scratch and we're going to get into the texts and move things around and renovate and rethink and try to make it. And I think this is one of the things. I mean, you were talking there about fan reaction to things like changing continuity and so on and violating canon. I think that is particularly prevalent in science fiction, that fans worry about stuff like that. And I think it's to do with the fact that there's a lot of criticism about literary criticism and cultural criticism about science fiction, and there's a strand inside some of the major strands of criticism which look upon science fiction as a genre, as a discourse, as fundamentally about sort of authorities of knowledge, narratives of knowledge, authority, and things like that. And I think that kind of lends itself to that sort of, small c conservative authoritarian fan mindset, where you want to treat it like it's. I mean, there are a lot of fans that love Star Trek, but they want to treat it like it's a series of CCTV recordings of things that actually happened in actual spaceships. And so it bothers them when something that's on tape 912 conflicts with something that's on tape 1702. There's a continuity error. In reality, how can suddenly the bubble pops and this feeling of narrative authority disappears? Doctor Who has suffered from this as well, but Doctor Who sort of has a series of escape hatches built into it, the most fundamental of which is that it's about time travel. So you can just say, well, the time travel changed things. Star Trek has it worse than anything else. And I think, the Hannibal Lecter series of texts, firstly, it's books and it's films and now it's television. So none of these things has primacy except arguably the novels. But most people, I would say, encountered them first as films, specifically Silence of the Lambs.
Yep.
And they've been made by different directors. Right. The first one wasn't the one that most people are familiar with. So even before the one that's most hegemonic, the Anthony Hopkins one, comes along, you already have this other version. Yeah. So you kind of have this proliferation of versions built into it from the start. And then you have the fact that it's not science fiction, whatever else it is, it's not science fiction. It's more like, as a text, it's more like Hamlet. So you can do things with it like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, because Hamlet is a text that everybody knows, but we all know that built into Hamlet as a text is the idea that there are hundreds of different versions of it. That's just part of it. Yeah.
So
you can do something like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead with it. You can interpolate into the text that everybody knows.
Mm-hmm. And even
while you're
of it
in the process,
Shakespeare did his.
Just
like that.
Hence, the Northman, the movie The Northman, for instance, is based upon the Hamlet. But and then you can do Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, the movie, which riffs on various different film versions of Hamlet that we know, the Olivier version and so on. It's more like as a text, it's more like that than it is anything like Star Trek.
Yeah, and
I think that's why
it serves it. Yes, and that does serve it well. I mean, one of the things that the potential of this, and I find it so fascinating that you said just a moment ago, Jack, with Doctor Who has this escape hatch because it's time travel, and yet the only time that it ever got close to doing this thing, which I think is interesting, this thing that we're talking about, which Hannibal does, it did it as a matter of necessity, and it wasn't even in its primary role as a television program. So there is quite an infamous story, George, that was never completed. It was written by Douglas Adams, and it was done in the late 70s, and they shot about 2/3 of it, and there was a strike at the BBC, so they never completed it. And there's been not fascinating so much as tediously, various ways that they've tried to complete it.
Right.
One of the ways they tried to complete it, I think must have been in the early 2000s, was as a kind of animation piece. Okay. But it was Tom Baker's era, and Tom Baker didn't want to do it. So they asked Paul McGann, who at that point was the most recent Doctor Who on television, if he would lend his voice to it. So they had to run it on the idea that the TARDIS crashed into his own canon, his own narrative, and of course kept changing it. So he was doing the events. They could have pushed it far better, actually. I mean, it's not very well done, but the idea of that, I've turned up, déjà vu, I've turned up and I'm doing things that I'm sure I've done, but I'm sure in a way weren't completed. So but that's the only time that's happened. Now, my argument would be, in a show like Doctor Who, where they've got the enormous advantage of that machine that can go anywhere and anywhere.
Exactly.
Why have they not? I mean, considering there are so many missing as well from the 60s, you could have actually had a really good excuse to say land a more recent Doctor into a story
Absolutely.
That is no longer existing from the archive, but not to do it slavishly, but to do it in this kind of to warp it, basically, to come at it from a completely different angle, and yet and do really what Jack has been saying, which is you can, I mean, the new show wouldn't be capable of it anyway, so that it's pie in the sky, but to get into its DNA and go, okay, we can do this without worrying about those kind of 1960s adventure tropes or 1960s ways of representing certain people, and it can be a new breathing living story, as you know, the reinterpretations of, for example, Shakespeare are, depending on who does them or whatever. And I just find it extraordinary how a series with that potential has never actually even noticed it except once, and almost by accident, because one actor didn't want to do it, so they had to get in someone else.
What's even more interesting about that is that the thing you're talking about, the audio thing with Paul McGann, where they did some animation to go with it to complete the story that you're talking about. It does that interesting thing that you're talking about, but only as lamp shading.
Yes.
Because if you didn't have that extra scene at the start where they write some lamp
exactly
shading,
the same, doesn't it?
You'd have the fans complaining about, well, where does this fit into continuity?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you get that anyway, and you're going to get it all. I mean, there are people who complain on the internet about continuity in The Simpsons. I'm not even kidding. I am not even kidding. You know, which is a show where even like for the purposes of jokes, because it is a comedy, even the individual episodes are not internally consistent. No. You know, if a joke requires the nuclear power plant to be next door to the Simpsons' house, they do it.
And I'm even sorry, though it's, I mean, those parents must be touching 70 now. If we're talking continuity, why are they still permanently 34?
Exactly.
They'd be up around 70. You know, it's so daft. It's so
exactly. Yes. Exactly that.
You know, their kids would be. I mean,
technically, Marge and Homer should be dead by this point.
Yeah,
I
think I'm dead on Bart's age.
This is just something that certain texts do. Like the Bond films have done this. The last few Bond films, like Skyfall, which everybody seems to think is a great movie, but which is actually shit.
I agree.
Because it's the big anniversary movie, they do things like, oh, look, Bond has gone to get his Aston Martin. Well, the Daniel Craig Bond has never had an Aston Martin.
No.
Why is this character who ostensibly was learning to be the great super spy the first time we met him in the Casino Royale movie 2006, why has he got a 60s Aston Martin in a garage somewhere? And he goes and gets it, and we get this loving shot, and we get the theme music. It's like, well, what is this? How has this got? This hasn't got anything to do with this character.
No.
But it's because it's harking back to the 1960s movies, of course, the Sean Connery movies, which by any indication in the actual set of texts that we're watching, the 4 movies or 5 movies or whatever it is now that feature this version of James Bond, it's got no relevance whatsoever. But because it's this set of texts that we all know don't actually have this overarching continuity, and they can't have. And we know that part of what they are is that every now and again they sort of restart from scratch and are played by a different person. It just kind of does this intertextuality thing.
Yeah.
And intertext, inter-audience, sort of shared cultural knowledge interaction thing. It just sort of does it automatically. And that's what Hannibal is doing. Dracula is another one. We all know that Dracula is just this character who every now and again he comes back and he's played by a different actor, and the whole of the approach is different. And you know, the Bram Stoker's Dracula movie that we talked about in one of the same log episodes, that does something similar. It plays around with imagery that calls back to the Nosferatu from the 20s and the Hammer films, etc., etc. And Hannibal is doing the same sort of thing, but it's doing it in a much more self-aware and deliberate way, I think.
And also a much more sophisticated way. It's not doing it, it's not as winking, as sort of aware of itself as a lot of these things are.
Just as an aside, because we must get back onto Hannibal, but you just reminded me, Jack, one of the most bizarre pieces of discontinuity, and you mentioned the Bond films, there's a fantastic example of it in the 60s, and even as you explain it, it's just mind-boggling, and yet it's kind of wonderful in its way, which is Connery's ostensibly last film, You Only Live Twice. He did another, of course, and then another again, I think. He meets Donald Pleasance as Blofeld, the guy who's been sort of in the background, who's just been a voice all the way through, and then he finally meets him. They confront, there's the big showdown and everything. And then in the very next film, of course, Connery's gone, and it's the single George Lazenby film. And James Bond and Blofeld meet in that story, which follows on directly from You Only Live Twice, because the operation that Bond is engaged in is even mentioned. The whole thing is predicated on the basis of M saying to him, "You've been hunting for Blofeld now for 2 years and you have not found him. We're dropping this operation." And then Bond finds him in Switzerland. And it's their very first scene together, and they don't recognise each other. And so it's this Mobius strip now, where it's like On Her Majesty's Secret Service is set both after and before You Only Live Twice. Then it gets even stranger, where obviously Lazenby does the one film. They tempt Connery back for a kind of coda, Roger Moore's warm-up man. And that film starts immediately in Japan as if On Her Majesty's Secret Service hasn't happened. So then Blofeld and it meets him in the correct order. So it's like someone's wedged this other universe in suddenly, which then gets conveniently forgotten about for about 4 or 5 films. And then this peculiar thing happens. This film, which they all went, "Oh Christ, we wish we never made that film, that George Lazenby film." It suddenly gets there's a lot of revisionism about it. And people start looking back to it going, "Do you know what, that was a good film. We just didn't realise it at the time," or whatever. And so they pick up the continuity from it again later on, as if 4 films in between didn't exist. And it's the most curious discontinuity. And the only way you really notice it is if you watch the films in order in a fairly compressed time. If you basically marathon them. And then it's like, this is incredibly mind-boggling. This is just that these films exist on such a bizarre Mobius strip.
Yeah.
I think
it is baked into the Hannibal franchise. It's absolutely baked in, because as Jack said, we've had the original film adaptation, which was Manhunter. I mean, even in the books, Hannibal is a fairly different character in The Silence of the Lambs than he is in Red Dragon. Yeah. And in Hannibal,
he's a different character in every book, frankly.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. It's absolutely baked in. And
which
it's
actually
even
allows for these different portrayals as well, because I've never, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, but I've never felt as if despite, and it was absolutely the right word to use, I think, as well, the hegemonic Silence of the Lambs, but there's no sense now that Anthony Hopkins is looked upon as being, well, that he's the only Hannibal, really. No sense of that at all. I mean, in fact, there's a great affection for Brian Cox's performance.
Yeah, there was a brief period where that was the case. There was a brief period, like through the 90s and early 2000s, where that was the case. But that opinion seems to have really dissolved in recent years.
But that doesn't always happen
Hannibal,
with these characters that are played by. That doesn't always happen, but I think, as you say, it is something in the nature of, and the fact that Manhunter was a sort of almost not an event as well. It happened, but people didn't really know it had happened until much later. It's rather like things like The Thing. It gathered its attention.
It's been rediscovered in retrospect, hasn't it? Yeah. Shadow of the Silence of the Lambs. It's been rediscovered.
There's one area in which the Hopkins version, and specifically the Silence of the Lambs version, is still hegemonic, and that's in the area of the punchline of comedy. When Lecter is used as comedy, like by like a late night TV show host doing a monologue where they compare Trump to Hannibal Lecter or something like that. Yeah. If they need a visual image of Hannibal Lecter, it's always Hopkins in the hockey mask.
Definitely,
because it's comedy, and it depends upon shared cultural knowledge, and that is the most that is the image where everybody who knows anything about Western culture, they know that's Hannibal Lecter.
Yes, and
it doesn't
probably
exclude
also
the others, but it's the universal signifier.
Yeah, the supping sound is very much in the public conscious. Oh, that's your cue. That's your Hannibal cue.
What Hopkins is doing there, I have no of why they kept it in the film. I'm like, having rewatched it recently, it doesn't work.
It doesn't. No, it's such a strange film in retrospect.
It is. It's very, very odd movie.
Not as it's
you
not
have this
as
film
good as people remember.
That is, it's not a good film. It has this fundamental incongruity at the heart of it, which is that it's trying to be this very sort of serious, realist film about serial murder and FBI investigations, and to an extent about misogyny and stuff like that. And you have like people like Scott Glenn and Jodie Foster all giving straight down the line realist serious, quote unquote serious performances, and then also in it you have Anthony Hopkins doing this camp Dracula.
Yeah.
Well, you almost get the sense. I mean, it's not that many years after Kruger, and you almost get the sense that if you have a villain like this on the screen, they've got to be able to wisecrack, and they've got to be able to be, somewhat grotesque. And if they're not visually grotesque, although I think that's partly why the hockey mask is there. I mean, that's almost a reference to Jason Voorhees anyway. It's you've got to suggest the grotesque. It was absolutely embedded, and yet having lived through that period in real time, my God, that film was massive. It was an instant.
It changed the zeitgeist. I mean, it changed Hollywood. It created. I mean, from that you
created the X-Files, which you mentioned.
The X-Files. So much of that mid to late 90s cinema and TV culture derived from that. I mean, funnily enough, in the next episode of Hannibal Buffet Froid, you actually have these references to the kind of pulp horror that Silence of the Lambs was drawing on.
Yeah, I mean, the whole opening sequence of that episode is,
it's complete right in horror with a monster and everything.
Proper horror territory, the monster lurking under the bed, and
I think one of the biggest shocks is it's the spray of blood from underneath the bed. It's really violent. It's really aggressive. There's a very nasty sound, and then just blood.
And of course, the image of this woman, I mean, that tapped into reminding me instantly of Home, the X-Files episode Home, the notorious X-Files episode.
Yeah, the officially scariest episode.
Yeah, where you're like, oh right, okay, I see where we might be making a kind of parallel here, before it goes off on its own.
It even goes down
journey.
like the way it portrays Georgia Madchen, the way she operates in the world. She is almost supernatural, isn't she? She's almost like a possessed person or something demonic,
and also that in that sense we were talking earlier, because she is someone suffering from something where she cannot make sense of her external reality, as with Will.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that these two quote unquote monsters find like humanity in one another, because she's also the most human of the killer characters that we face, because she's totally innocent in her own peculiar way.
And the moment that I think these two episodes become twins is there's that moment when in the previous episode where crumbs, or am I getting confused? I think it might be in the episode I've just seen, actually. So it's one stage on, which is when Hannibal is convinced, yes, it's the one I've just seen, is convincing Will that Abel Gideon is not in front of him. That he is not there. Absolutely mirrors the moment where she cannot see Hannibal.
Yep.
So it's all these wonderful links. I mean, I know I'm jumping ahead, but that is a fantastic moment when Hannibal is basically saying he's not there.
He's not there.
Who do you see?
And Will is seeing Garrett
Jacob Hobbs. He's not even seeing Abel Gideon.
The person he's seeing isn't there.
Yeah, I tell no lies.
Hannibal kind of isn't lying again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh wow! It's that Al Pacino devil thing in like The Devil's Advocate, isn't it? No, I don't deal in lies. The truth is so much more fun.
Yeah.
But no, I mean and also you get this weird moment in this one where Will really loses it at the crime scene, where he sees himself actually committing the murder.
Yes, yeah.
And he is mutilating the corpse. Ooh, yeah. That must be a moment for Will, and it really is. And, Jack lets him get on with it.
I know.
Again. Jack just, takes the explanation and lets him get on with it. And even, justifies him in it. He tries to tell Will what he does. You don't go in. You don't.
Oh yes, you've disturbed the crime scene, isn't it? That was
but in the next sequence, because he needs Will, because Will is being useful to him. He tells him, "This actually isn't what you do. You do not inhabit these serial killers' lives and minds and actions." He tells him that you just take the evidence and piece it together in a very particular way. You create a pattern from it. Because that's what Jack requires of him. That's what Jack requires of the world. Yeah. But the world is becoming sand now.
Yeah.
He restates the official narrative about Will to Will and then says in a threatening voice, "That's right, isn't it, Will?
Yeah.
Say yes." That's what he's doing.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And he's
say yes for Daddy.
Say
yes for Daddy.
He's strong-arming Will into accepting that narrative. And as he's doing it, he's performing, concerned and questioning and, well, just tell me if there's a problem and we'll call the whole thing off. And they both know, as they're having the conversation, that Jack means the opposite of that.
Exactly that.
Jack means, no, we're not going to stop. You need to say the things that I need you to say so that we can carry on. It's the definition of gaslighting.
Yeah,
it so is, right? It's total gaslighting. This is an abusive relationship, right? It's a totally abusive relationship. And what I love is the way, what Hannibal does to Will is abusive too, but it's not, in its own peculiar way, it's no more abusive than what Jack's doing.
And Jack is trying to do it. Well, Jack is doing it with the seal of legitimacy.
Exactly,
which makes it worse in a way.
Also, the weird thing is the way the show pans out. Hannibal does see something real in Will, and he is trying to guide him towards a state.
Jack very uninterested in the flaws and frailties of his stuff. Yeah. Very uninterested.
What Jack is doing to Will, he is doing for himself, for Jack Crawford. Jack Crawford is doing it for Jack Crawford. And again, the official line is that, I'm trying to save people and stop there being more victims, etc. It's all about Jack Crawford. Yep. Hannibal is manipulating Will, but it's more like the way a therapist manipulates a patient, because Hannibal, from his point of view, he's doing it for Will. I mean, he's doing it also for Hannibal, but he sees their interests as being aligned.
That's right, and he also sees Will as this living art. He sees Will as something beautiful, and he wants to guide him to a greater state of beauty in his own eyes. Whereas Jack doesn't see that at all. He doesn't even see Will as an individual. He sees Will as a tool, and
he's
fairly disposable one at that, despite all of his moral sort of, later on he will sort of he'll have his little moment where he'll sit and say, "Oh, I saw it happening and I did nothing and I pushed him too far." Yeah, you did, Jack. Yeah, you did.
It's just Leland Palmer again. That's just I did the bad thing, but I feel bad about it. Ergo, I'm not a bad guy. I'm the good guy.
Exactly that.
I get to do it, and because I felt bad about it, I'm still a good person.
And I think that's why Jack's hatred of Hannibal, when he does start, when he does discover who he is, I think that's why it's so driven. That's why it's so vengeful and so violent. It's not because Hannibal is a serial killer. It's not because he's a sadist, or because he operates contrary to Jack's morality. It's because he's held up a highly unflattering mirror to Jack Crawford.
He just completely reveals what Jack Crawford is and what he's been doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Alana ends up so fiercely. I mean, obviously Alana has more direct reasons to hate Hannibal, but I think Alana's hatred actually is similar, because Hannibal does something similar to her. I'm growing to absolutely despise Alana Bloom in this, because she is such a moral coward. She performs concern and performs safeguarding people around Jack and against Jack. But at every stage, she gives in to him and lets him get away with it. Whatever he's doing, she does it with Will, she does it with Abigail. And what she's doing by doing that is she's not only flattering herself, as she's collaborating, she's flattering herself that she's not. She's also she's making it possible for Jack to do what he does and giving Jack an alibi. Jack's always got, well, I've got Alana here agreeing with me or supervising or whatever. It never really struck me before, but on this rewatch, I am disgusted by Alana Bloom.
She has the power and the authority to step in at several moments where Jack is
stop at any
Abigail Hobbs. And Will.
All she has to do is blow the whistle.
Yep, she has the power. But because she's part of this weird, incestuous little group, this family dynamic that is kind of abusive inherently, she won't do it. She won't do it in the same way that, the spouse of an abusive wife or husband so often does not.
She lets Jack pull off that stunt where Jack confronts Abigail with the gory corpse and interrogate her essentially in this, this suspect that he's abusing, and she's got no representation except Alana, and Alana is working for the guy that's accusing her. It's outrageous behavior. And Alana is, by being there and telling herself, well, I'm there representing Abigail's interests, and getting all self-righteous with Jack about how he's what he's doing and so on. But she's just allowing him to do it. And she makes this faint sort of pretense of trying to stand up for Abigail, and Jack says, da-da-da-da-da, shouts her down and says, don't interrupt me again. And I'm almost screaming at the television, don't let him get away with that. Tell her, you need to leave right now, Abigail. You need to call a lawyer, do something. But she doesn't. She just stands there.
Yeah. And funnily enough, I seem to recall that later on, quite a bit later on, after the whole thing with Will has come to fruition and Will is in the penitentiary, Jack throws that back in her face. She starts accusing him, and he says to her something like, "You were there too. You saw him slipping as well, and you let it happen too. So don't get all self-righteous with me."
And it's fair comment.
It is fair. It is. It's fair. It's absolutely fair. It's true of all of them, isn't it? They all see it happening. But they allow it.
Again, it would require facing things about. We talked earlier about how Abigail can't suspect, Alana can't suspect Abigail because that would mean suspecting Hannibal. She can't face that because that means facing the fact that her own judgment is catastrophically bad. She's doing the same thing with Jack Crawford. She can't face what Jack Crawford actually is because that would mean, I've been collaborating with this atrocious guy.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You also get, I think it's in this episode, or it may have been in the previous one, that sort of reiteration of the pseudo romance between her and Will, which is neither here nor there. It's neither one thing or another, but it's really tortuous for Will. He doesn't understand.
Back and forth on that,
right. And she is. I mean, well, the funny thing is the power dynamics of it, because Will is a person who doesn't have the slightest clue when it comes to like romantic entanglement. He just doesn't understand the cues or anything like that. And she has all the power there. All the power is hers. And it's this constant, it's slightly narcissistic actually. It's this push me, pull me thing. Yeah. It's this, I'm going to kiss you, but I'm not, but then I'm going to say no. I'm going to, I'm going to tell you that I'm attracted to you, but I'm not,
and it's all hidden behind this. Afterwards. It's all hidden behind this pretended concern about her ethics. It's not good for you as in your condition, and you, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, I'm sorry. When did your professional ethics start being a consideration?
So when did they stop being anything? Right?
If the professional ethics was such a concern, you wouldn't have even gone there in the first place. You wouldn't have been having to say it. That's the ethical position, to say nothing.
Absolutely.
You can't lead Abigail Hobbs into that trap that Jack Crawford sets for her, and then you think, well, okay, I did that. I brought her to him so he could pull that disgusting stunt. But I frowned at him, so I'm a good person.
Yeah. You see it in the way that Jack refers to Georgia Mansion as well. She's she's almost incidental to Jack, despite the fact she does end up doing some pretty awful things in this show. She doesn't exist to him. She's not of interest. It's the most bizarre, dehumanizing thing.
Yeah, because she's not because of the nature of her condition means that she's not morally culpable for what she does. So he can't fit her into his great sort of moralistic hero drama that he's got going on inside his own head.
That's why
she just becomes a variable. Yeah. Yeah, she just becomes a variable like the weather or something like that. He can't have a moral hero posture towards her.
Right. So he's almost absent. He becomes like, it's all Will's. This is all Will's story. And he steps back.
Yeah. It almost hits upon something that reminds me of No Country for Old Men. It's this idea that really, if this were back in the day, this would be Jack's show. It would be like Jack was Kojak, or something.
He thinks it is. That's what I was saying before.
And he thinks it is, exactly. He thinks he is Kojak, basically, and this is his show where he's like the godlike, like Olympian cop.
That's part of the fun that
the Maverick
has with Jack. That's part of the fun that Hannibal has with Jack. Because Hannibal knows for a fact that Jack feels that way and that he thinks that way. And it's fun for Hannibal to let him have that delusion and then to pull the rug out from under him. So actually, no, you are not in control at all. Your view of reality, of this reality, is so myopic. And you don't see what you think you see. You don't see the artistry and the beauty in Will. You think you see the killer in Abigail, but you only see it on your own terms. You see it in like a moralistic sense, in the as judge, jury, and executioner. That's all you see it as. And I'm going to rip this world apart around you.
Yeah, and your absolute moralism is impaired by your own amoral behavior towards your fellows.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a scene in this one, I can't remember correctly, but there is a scene in this one where he basically hints that if Georgia Mansion recovers herself, then she will be standing trial, for what she's done, and that's all Jack cares about. That's all Jack is bothered about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about the episode Earth with the scene in the car with the little boy. The cold-hearted savagery of Jack Crawford's approach to this boy, who you can't possibly, no morally sane system would consider him morally culpable, at least not in any sort of full sense, for anything that he did. But Jack Crawford is the absolute embodiment of that system that says, you did this thing, okay, you're 9 years old or whatever you are, but we're going to try you as an adult because it was an adult crime. We're going to put you behind bars because the system in its great big yawning sort of mouthful of teeth that wants to devour people, it must be satisfied, and we justify it all with this Christian morality. Well, he's doing the same thing re Georgia Mansion. She will be sacrificed to the gaping maw of the just quote unquote justice system, because that's what I do. That's why I'm the good guy. I feed people into that.
We've all seen it. I say that the savagery that is the response to anyone who, particularly women or children who are involved in serious crime.
Women,
women or children.
He has a real thing with women, doesn't he, Jack?
Well, no, I just mean in terms of our society. I mean, where there's been real world crime. I mean, really nasty crime, but the perpetrators have been either women or children. I mean, the savagery of the response, of media response, the chattering class response, all this. I always remember my dad, because he was of that age and of that generation where the Moors murders was a big thing, and he said I always used to find it very telling. My dad said we always used to hear about Myra Hindley more than Ian Brady.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it was the absolute transgression.
That's it.
And that the real bitter savage response was on her, more so than on him.
Yeah.
I mean, there it is, I mean, it's in that scene with that Jack's just talked about is brilliantly reflected in that scene. I mean, we would have experienced it ourselves with obviously the Bulger killing.
Yes,
I mean, it was lunatic after. In the aftermath of that, in terms of
years after that, right?
Years after,
after
in terms of the perspective on the killers, it's like, my gosh, this has crossed so many lines.
Yeah.
Well, Mary Bell is another decades after the crimes that she committed as quite a small child. She did her time, and she came out and she was given a new identity, and the tabloids found her and outed her, didn't they?
Yeah.
The lust to pile on the punishment to this person who, yes, did dreadful things, but because she was a little girl, a girl and a child, the sense of betrayal of these values that girls and children are supposed to represent having been betrayed. You confronted us with the falsity of our own morality.
Of our own
you did it in the most stark way possible because of who you are, and you can never be allowed. You will be hounded until you die for doing that to us.
That's exactly.
And that's not comparable to Myra Hindley, obviously, who did what she did as an adult. I'm not
exactly.
I'm not saying,
I agree. Yeah,
I'm not defending Myra Hindley. I hardly believe I have to say that.
Yeah, just in case, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting, isn't it? That seems to be part of what this show is. It's part of what it does, isn't it? It goes for these transgressions internally and externally on a wider sense. So, like, within its own narrative and its thesis, it's constantly wrong-footing both its characters and its audience. Like, they don't do what you would expect of characters from in their particular brackets in this kind of show.
Yes.
It's really strange. I mean, you get the character Sutcliffe in this episode, who's really strange and interesting. I mean, you said earlier, Elliot, he could have done with a bit more time, and that's absolutely true. He could have done with baking a bit.
Well, I mean, my God, there's so
can
much
either of you
implication
explain to me why he does what he does? I mean, why does he help Hannibal
the
keep from Will the fact that Will has it? I don't understand
because because I say it needs more, but
it does.
It's this just utter vanity that that Hannibal is tapping into. But they haven't found the time to explore it, because Sutcliffe seems so. My God, that the buttons can be pressed on his vanity this easily. He's very interesting. Now, what's the history? And then it doesn't happen because they've got to get on with it.
He doesn't get chance. Right? He doesn't get chance.
And it's a similar way he passes off the. You can smell disease on people now, Hannibal. It's all very blasé, and you think this is really interesting. Where are we going with this guy? And unfortunately, we don't get there.
We don't really go anywhere.
It's
so
like,
he gets.
It's like he thinks he's going to win a Nobel Prize or something because he's going to study somebody with untreated encephalitis. It's like, no, you're going to get disbarred for not treating a patient who's going to. Meanwhile,
or if
the
you're
person
Marjorie
that
Taylor
you
Greene
might get a Nobel Prize for studying is standing right next to you in a smart suit. You should be studying Hannibal.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a line at one point where, and it's kind of throwaway, so it's not really enough. Where
I said disbarred. You're going to be unfrocked from the medical profession.
I was going to say it all went a bit Marjorie Taylor Greene there, didn't it? Was it disrobed or?
Hannibal just dangles something in front of him. He said something like, "It's so rare to be able to study this kind of condition firsthand," and that's it. That's what you get. So it's implied to be a strange kind of curiosity, the potential to write.
Why can't you study it if Will knows about it?
Exactly. Right. His death is particularly horrible as well, isn't it? It's a really gory, unpleasant moment. Again, most of it's implied. You don't really see that much, but you hear a lot, and you see Hannibal sort of straining at it, I
understand why Hannibal feels the need to get rid of him. I get that. I don't know quite why Hannibal kills him in a manner that makes it look like he was killed by the same person that I suppose it's just camouflage, isn't it? If he can make it look like Georgia killed Sutcliffe as well.
I'd assume that's it, yes.
Or is he already attempting to frame Will? I don't know.
It may be playing into that. It may be playing into the wider narrative where it's like several layers of camouflage. So he's trying to make it look like Will killed him, making it look like Georgia Madchen killed him, which of course will play out later.
I prefer the idea that it's just Hannibal sees a method of killing somebody and he thinks, "Oh, I want to have a go."
I'll have a go at that. I'll have a go. Why not? There's a punishment element to it as well. I feel there's because he makes his devil's deal with Hannibal. That's it. He's done from that moment. He is going to die. He also says something at the dinner scene where he's with.
Well, killing is rather like making dinner for Hannibal, isn't it? I mean, he gets some inspiration.
Absolutely. There's no distinction. There is no distinction. They are equal levels of artistry. That's it. But at the scene where Sutcliffe is at Hannibal's house and they're both eating Iberico ham, I do believe. Sutcliffe says of Will. They're talking about how Iberico ham is selected and how it's a very rare pig and whatnot. And Sutcliffe says, "So how do you get your pig, Hannibal?" And I think there is a flicker there. He called my Will a pig. Oh, he's done. From that moment, he's over. He's over. You don't say stuff like that about Will to Hannibal.
There is also, and there's another moment, I can't remember exactly what it was, but Sutcliffe says something that obviously makes Hannibal think he can't trust him to keep his mouth shut or something. I can't remember what it is, but he does have a pragmatic reason to kill him.
Yes. Yeah, he does. He has a completely down the line reason, but like everything Hannibal does, he turns it into this wider theatre and this wider piece of artistry because that's his nature, right? He can't help himself. Just can't help himself. And of course, you get that wonderful thing of the world bending around Hannibal, the narrative, the plot bending around him like magic. And Georgia just happens to walk in while he's killing Sutcliffe. So he has the opportunity, A, to look her in the eye and to give her the scissors that he's using. So well, the text is Will is warping the text around himself in this as well. That's what the memory losses are. That's why he turns around and suddenly he's in a different part of the episode. He's experiencing the edit. That's it.
The characters aren't supposed to notice and experience the edit, but Will has started to notice and experience the cut.
He does it again in the episode that follows quite strongly,
quite starkly, right? Quite starkly, and that happens in the hospital as well. When Hannibal is killing Sutcliffe, he loses time when he's in the MRI machine. But also, I mean, that whole space is kind of liminal. The hospital's massive, but there's nobody there.
No,
you get these sequences of Will getting out of the MRI machine on his own. There's no nurses or anything, and walking through the corridors looking for Dr. Sutcliffe.
Very eerie.
Very strange, uncanny. It has a sort of like backrooms quality to it. It's like they've slipped into a liminal space together, which they kind of have because this whole show.
I've had an MRI, and there is something unnerving about the experience of being inside one of those things, and then you do feel strangely cut off from the world. It is a bit like being in a coffin or an isolation tank or something like that.
A lot of people have panic attacks in them and things. They're not meant to be very pleasant experiences at all.
I just remember having the absolute fear.
Your own one, but
No, I just remember having the absolute fear that although my rational part of my brain was saying that there was no metal in my body, that possibly I did. So I remember the gurney that you're on starts sliding into the tube. Say, "Oh my God, quick brain! Do you have you got?"
Like a paperclip I swallowed as a child or something.
It's completely irrational.
But I mean,
they gave me They put headphones on me, and you get a choice of what kind of music you want on. So I selected classical, and I got like the Four Seasons or something. So I'm in the hospital smock, and I'm lying in this thing, and I've got the Vivaldi going, and I'm thinking, any minute now, I won't be able to help myself. I'm going to shout, "Soylent Green is people!"
Oh, Christ.
That whole sequence is actually really quite like the opening sequence. It kind of mirrors it in a way. It tops and tails it because it's a horror sequence again, isn't it? It's a classic down the line horror sequence. And I like the fact that the whole. Sorry, go on, Jack.
I love how almost parodically sweet the victim is as well. I mean, her name is Beth LeBeau, for God's sake, and she's all like, everything's got flowers on it and horses, and she's so almost, as I say, almost parodically just the epitome of the nice girl, the cute girly girl, or whatever.
Yeah, and then you find out, of course, that she was Georgia Manchin's best friend at school as well, and it's like, it's very sad, isn't it? Yeah. It's a very sad story.
Georgia's story is terribly sad, and I have to say, I think these two episodes are probably my least favorite episodes of this series so far, particularly Trou Normand, which I think it's actually the worst episode of the series so far. Buffet Foire is better, but it's still got some serious weaknesses in it. But I love the sequence where Georgia turns up in Will's house, and he reaches out to her and he says, "You're alive. We're here together."
Yeah.
And she takes his hand. It's so moving.
It is. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's a lovely sequence. It really, really is. And of course, it's that whole mirroring thing, because they're both suffering kind of similar distortions of reality. And he's telling it to himself as well. Obviously, you are real. You are here. Yeah. It's that whole grounding thing. That's what Hannibal says to him.
I wanted to raise this because there's a really fascinating note in this. Will, the first time he sees her, you get he's aware of the cut, the edit in time. He suddenly finds himself in the woods.
Yep.
But he knows that it's not a long time afterwards, and he can't see her, but he thinks she might be around somewhere. So he shouts to her, "You're alive. You're alive." Now he does that before anybody comes up with the idea of the syndrome where the sufferer believes that they're dead. And when he's told about that, he gives no indication whatsoever that it's something he's even considered before. He is just from that contact he's had with her, he's picked that up.
Yeah. He also has very early on, I mean, he doesn't know that part of Cuvard syndrome is that you can't see faces, but he already has had the hallucination where he can't see his own face in the mirror when he's in her role.
Yes, yeah. And of course, faces of clocks, it's all there,
It's becoming more supernatural, actually. His ability is becoming more uncanny as reality is slipping and sliding all over the place. And that's part of Hannibal's motivation, right? That's part of Hannibal's motivation for keeping the encephalitis around, because it's fueling it somehow.
Yeah. It makes sense.
I was going to say that thing where he knows that she feels that she's dead before anybody diagnoses her. That's another, and he apparently just knows that psychically. That's another moment where the series almost tips over the old Todorov hesitation that I've talked about before.
Yeah.
I think
not quite, because it's not picked up on. They don't go any further with it, but it happens nonetheless.
I mean, later on in the third season, when it is completely metaphysical, it will basically, like, he goes to places where he just knows Hannibal is. He just knows he's going to be there, and there are wrinkles in it, because, like, you could say that he would know Hannibal would be at this kind of place, but it's like, nah, it's complete magic. It's complete magic, and the show knows that it's magic. And it's already edging that way. It's still grounded in this CSI Baltimore thing. Like the Crawford's world, it's still holding on, but it's holding on by only a few threads, and it's going to start coming down very soon.
Yes.
But yeah, I would agree, actually, Jay. I think Trou, I mean, they both have elements which I really like. They really do, and which are important to the story. But I think Trou Normand in particular is it's one of the grayer episodes, isn't it? It's one of those episodes where it's difficult to get a bead on.
Well, I think it's sort of
Go on, please.
I was just going to say, I think it's almost, as I said much earlier, it's sort of pointed in how minor it's making a whole chunk of it. But yeah. I mean, I think in terms of, I think the only other episode that I would say, again, very interesting in its way. It's more of a time thing, but flawed is and I'm terribly bad on names, but the one with the which we mentioned, which had the with the boys, that she had the family.
Earth.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Again, really good elements, but that one just fell a bit below the standards of the others, and I think it was more a time thing. It felt like there was enough in there for 2 episodes, and they sort of compressed it into.
Well, that's true of True North.
Wasn't there a writer's strike or something? I
don't know.
George,
I don't know
some
what
particular production issue about.
There wasn't there?
I can't remember what you said.
I have to rewatch the episode, but there was something very specific.
Bit accidental that it ended up. Like
the killer of the week in Trou Normand, it feels so perfunctory, and it doesn't match. Like, I mean, Elliot's been talking about this, and it's a very interesting, convincing reading of why that works. Certainly in terms of the larger themes of the series, and also you, George, saying about how it's like the series is shrugging off the serial killer of the week format almost with disdain, and I agree with all that. But it still leaves this. I mean, I can't tell you the plot of the serial killer plot of Trou Normand, because I've seen this episode several times now, but it just slides off my brain. It won't go in because it's too boring. It's like it's about somebody's son and remarriage and stepson or something. I just don't care. It's not interesting.
A great deal of
and
there's
a fundamental mismatch
as well. I mean, we don't see it.
There is just a fundamental mismatch between the grandiosity of the totem pole and the pettiness of the actual the guy. He does not. I can't see that character creating that edifice.
No, I literally had to be very fanciful on a thematic level to justify that. But I think in the terms you're saying, no, it doesn't make sense. It's not coherent.
Why would he? Why would somebody with those sorts of concerns do that?
I don't think. I'm trying to think, because they will revisit the serial killer of the week format later on in like season 2, because like there's that. We'll get to it when we get to it, but there's that wonderful episode. It's the opening episode of season 2 where Hannibal has taken on Will's role and he's fucking loving it. He actually says, "I got to play Will Graham today. I got to be Will Graham today." And you get that serial killer of the week turning up again, but they are always, from this point on, grandiose. They're always doing something
this is the
metamorphic or artistic or transcendental.
I think what you say about that character being intended to be a longer running character and getting artificially truncated, that makes a lot of sense to me, because it begins with this great fanfare of the totem pole image, and then it just sort of fizzles out into nothing really.
But this is where
that does work metatextually, but as a just an experience on its own, it's a bit bewildering. It's not even the kind of, I mean, Coquille, which is still my favorite episode of them all so far, that ends with a kind of an anticlimax and a kind of whimper, but it feels satisfying because it's leading there. It's leading to a tragic cul-de-sac all the way. The story is leading to that place. It doesn't work in Trou Normand at all. I think
it doesn't. It's too grey, isn't it? And also you have that bizarre contrast with what's happening with Will, Hannibal, and Abigail, which is way more interesting. It's way more interesting.
And it's
more
all of
that.
In it.
Yes,
it's part of the problem. It is far more interested in that part of the story. That's why it can't wait to kill the
serial killer of the week.
Yeah, the serial killer of the week quickly enough.
And of course, after these 2 episodes, I think it pretty much goes away for a while.
I mean,
pretty much is done
in the episode I've just seen, because I'm ahead.
And that's it.
we're deep back into sort of Abel Gideon and that. Yeah.
And Abel Gideon is not serial killer of the week. He counts as main core cast
Absolutely.
character.
He's a recurring character.
In it. I mean, even after he's dead, he's going to be in it for a while in flashback. He's in it quite a lot. Is Abel Gideon. Which makes sense, given that he is an aspect of Hannibal. He's the Silence of the Lambs Hannibal, isn't he?
Yeah.
He basically he's Manhunter Hannibal.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I mean, I'm so happy to be back on this train. Nice.
Yeah.
Very, very indeed. And I can't wait to get on to the next episodes, the ones that are a bit more florid and fulsome.
Yes, I agree. Even with a couple of relatively underwhelming episodes, it's still nice to be back.
Oh, absolutely. And I say underwhelming. There's still,
nothing
I still
ever feels
watching.
Yeah, nothing ever feels like filler.
It's still.
I mean,
it's
there are
still
flaws.
Hannibal. So
yeah.
Even the weak
flawed.
episodes are still episodes of Hannibal.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I must admit, there are flaws, there are inconsistencies, there are obviously behind the scenes troubles which that just intrude into the viewing experience. That's just part and parcel of it. But I never get the sense of schedule filling. I mean, that to me, that's always the kind of biggest crime in any series of serial. It's when you get the episode which is clearly like, we've got to fill 45 minutes.
Yeah, so we're going to do the clip or something like that. Right?
You might as well. In fact, there's almost more integrity in doing a clip show if you get than some of the filler. But I'm quite happy with episodes that fall short if there's the germ of an idea in them, or at least in certain parts trying to do something. But I think it's a fair assessment. There is a real sense that particularly with the first one here, that it's been truncated into a single episode. It's not,
definitely.
I
like Will in these episodes as well. Like Hugh Dancy's performance.
He's really coming into an interesting phase, actually.
Isn't he?
I think one of the things is that they've decided among them just to ditch trying to even attempting to make Will likable. The program can because we kind of like him because of the context he's in and the vulnerabilities he has. He doesn't actually have to be that shying away from it at times. They're not shying away from it anymore, and it doesn't damage the character at all. It actually
makes him more interesting, doesn't it? I mean, like, when Hannibal asks him to draw the clock, he does, because he doesn't understand why he's doing it. He gets really huffy about it. He's like, all right, fine. And the way he draws the clock is oddly aggressive. Where he's sort of stabbing at the page. He's like, my name is Will Graham. It's 7:45 in Baltimore. There, done. Yeah. Whatever that was for,
Yeah.
I love that Will is completely taken in by the bullshit rationale that Hannibal gives him about drawing the clock. Obviously, Hannibal gets him to draw the clock because he wants to gauge the extent of Will's physical illness. But he gives him some sort of bullshit about centering yourself or anchoring yourself in time and space, something like that. And Will completely buys it to the point where later on, when he's out in the middle of nowhere, he repeats some of the bullshit that Hannibal gave.
Yeah, it actually does become a mantra for him, doesn't it? He actually does use it as a mantra, which is interesting.
I love that.
Yeah. I'm strong in the Force is strong in me.
Shall not fear. Fear is the mind killer.
Is that what it is?
Fear is the little death that brings total oblivion.
Fantastic.
Oh, brilliant. Well, guys, before we close down, is there anything that you guys want to pimp out there?
I mean, not really. I mean, just the usual. No. I mean, I think I might have already pimped it out in the last one about the last thing I was doing, whatever it was. So no. It's all very quiet at the moment.
Yeah, quiet on the Western Front.
I mean, I'm actually really busy. Yes. There's. Actually, I will recommend. I didn't narrate it, but I did produce it. I have to say one of the most interesting books I've done in a long time. I've got to look up the title because I know the name of the author. Isn't that terrible? Candida Moss is the name of the author, and the book I produced it. No, I didn't. I'm talking. Honestly, I don't know what is wrong with me this week. I better draw a clock.
Draw a clock, Elliot. Yeah.
I didn't produce this. I actually narrated it, and I only narrated it this week. And yet, for some reason, oh my god, I've got to look up what it's called. This is really embarrassing because I did it this week, but my brain has a tendency to dump information as soon as it's.
Point.
Yes, I'm trying to find her. I tell you, someone else go. I will find out the title of this thing. So someone else jump in.
No worries. When you do find the title and everything, if there's a web page where it can be pre-ordered or anything like that,
Here
chuck
it is.
it out.
So I narrated this, and so it's not. It won't be available immediately, but I would actually recommend the text as well. People don't need my voice. It's a book by Candida Moss, who's a biblical scholar, and it's called God's Ghostwriters, and it is a fascinating book, and it is about basically how the Gospels, the New Testament, were very likely to have been compiled using basically slaves who had their own version of shorthand, who worked with the effectively the storytellers, but how the Gospels are absolutely loaded with code between slaves, and how the stories were often tilted to a more emancipatory or revolutionary or radical perspective, because of course they were slaves. It was a vested interest to them to present parts of the Gospels in a more radical form. And
I'd be interested in that myself. That sounds really
fascinating book. It goes into some very, very interesting details about, particularly the Gospel of Mark. That's the biggie. But it was absolutely fascinating to do the read on that. But I don't imagine the audiobook would be out maybe for another month by the time it's edited and packaged and so on. But I do strongly recommend the book to anyone who's has even a passing interest in what it's doing. It was really, really great. I recommended it to our mutual friend Christine Kelly, because I think it very much
that sounds
in her
up Preston Street, actually.
Yeah,
very much so.
I strongly recommend. Yeah, I think it would be a very interesting point of interest to you as well, for you as well, Jack.
I'm pretty sure you recommended this on the last last podcast we did.
Very
possibly. It might not have been the Predator, but it might have been the Hereditary one.
I just finished doing the last Ken MacLeod audiobook for his Lightspeed trilogy, and then I was just given this. So I think by that point I had just read it for myself and prepped it.
Nice.
And I thought, this is actually really, really good. So it was a pleasure to do. So I don't know, I got slightly confused in my own head. No, I actually narrated this one. I didn't produce it. But I do really recommend it. Really I'm actually very tempted to read it again at some point. It was very interesting. Yeah.
Well, as I say, throw any links my way, and I'll put them in the comment section below.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
As for me, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Patreon, I'm at Eruditorium Press. I write things. Go to my Patreon, you get advance access to anything I write and my podcasts. And I Don't Speak German is back. That's my main project, has been for many years. It's with Daniel Harper. We talk about the far right and their fellow travelers and all that sort of thing. And we're back. There's a new bonus episode, and there's already 2 new free public episodes. One is about the collapse of the so-called National Justice Party, which is a bunch of Nazis in America, and the hilarious story of the collapse of their organization. And the other one is about the recent march of the Blood Tribe neo-Nazi group through Nashville, Tennessee. And then there's another one that we did a Twitter space with the podcaster Ina Mohammed Smith, where we talk about the really dystopian and disgusting propaganda that's coming out on social media, TikTok, Twitter, etc., about justifying the assault on Gaza, the genocidal assault on Gaza. So that's all up now. It's at the YouTube channel. It's on the podcast feed. So yeah, that's the main thing. I don't speak German.
Brilliant.
And
once again,
since we're links below. And since we're recommending books, I just recently read a brilliant book called, if you're interested in the far right, for instance, it's by a writer, an academic called Claudia Kuntz, and it's called The Nazi Conscience. And it's genuinely one of the best books I have ever read about the Nazis and the Third Reich, about the culture about the moral universe they lived in. Anybody who's interested in this subject, who wants to try to get their head around how and why it happened, I genuinely cannot think of a book that's going to give you more information and more understanding. So
wow,
there you go.
Wow, fantastic.
What was that title
as for
again,
myself,
Jack?
what was that one?
Sorry?
So what was that title again?
It's called The Nazi Conscience.
The
and
Nazi
it's by Claudia
Conscience.
Kuntz.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Thank you.
Interesting. As for myself, guys, you can find me here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel, where there's lots and lots of podcasts and things like this, and video game let's plays and all sorts of things. Hobby ramblings about Warhammer 40,000 and all sorts of stuff. If you go over to Arrow Films, you will find the new Hellraiser UHD and Blu-ray set, The Quartet of Torment, and myself and Kit Power, who all of you know on this channel, we feature on the Hellbound disc on the featurette. What the hell? No, it's not What the Hell Is Wrong With Us. That's our podcast, isn't it? It's Hell Is What They Wanted. That's the name of the featurette. Very, very
What
proud.
the hell is what they wanted is wrong with us.
What the hell is what they wanted? One day we'll put that together. That has to be like a big grand podcast that we have to put together.
Absolutely.
At some point. As for my published work, you can find links to it over at strangeplaygrounds.com, and if you go to the Evil Empire of Amazon and type in George Daniel Lee, you'll find my author page that has all of the anthologies and short story collections and all the things I've been published in there. Currently working on over at gingernutsofhorror.com, taking over the My Life in Horror series of articles and essays from Kit Power. There's loads of those waiting to come out very, very soon. It's just me really diving deep into the media that shaped my imagination. That's really it. So if you're into deep dives into horror media, you'll certainly enjoy that. It's lovely to be back, guys. It's lovely to be back doing this, and I cannot wait to the next episodes. It really is.
Wicked.
Brilliant.
Forward to it.
Bye-bye.
Brilliant.
Ta-ta.
What could have